been 10 long years since the WWE 2K series began officially, and it all started with the first game in the series, WWE 2K15. If you were there in 2014, you know that WWE 2K15 was a massive deal even before it officially released, as it was set to be one of the biggest wrestling games of all time. I mean, we were fresh off the banger that was WWE 2K14, so expectations for 2K15 were pretty damn high. As 2014 went on, we would see loads of screenshots come out giving us our first glimpses of what 2K15 was gonna look like, and I'm gonna be honest, the graphics for the game looked stunning. The thing is though, that's all we really saw from the game. Other than the fact that the game was set to be released on Xbox One and PS4, and that the game looked pretty, we hardly knew anything about the game. We didn't know what the gameplay would be like, or what the game would actually entail. WWE 2K15 could have been the exact same as 2K14, just with better graphics for all we knew. Eventually, WWE 2K15 would release on October 28, 2014, and man, it was bad. Sure, the game still looked great visually, but when it came down to it, it was lacking and failed in a lot of other aspects. The game had no match types whatsoever, the gameplay was slow and clunky, and the big featured mode for this game, which was of course the My Career, was the complete opposite of good. Now, I'm not gonna say the entire game was bad, I mean the roster was okay at least, but again, for this having been the first WWE 2K game that was released on next gen, it was pretty underwhelming. Now that I got all that out of the way though, I think it's time we take a deeper look at WWE 2K15 and find out what made it so bad. The first thing I want to talk about when it comes to 2K15 is the gameplay, because as I said a little bit ago, this game is slow as hell. Seriously, doing anything in this game feels like a chore because the gameplay is so painfully slow and clunky. This game's gameplay felt like a massive downgrade from 2K14, and it sucked out everything that made 2K14's gameplay as fun as it was. Now, if you were playing this game on Xbox 360 or PS3, you were definitely better off since the gameplay in that version was just a copy and paste of 2K14, which meant that it was fast, fluid, and responsive. The gameplay in the Xbox One version, though, was the complete opposite of fast and fluid. Transitioning between moves in this game feels like it takes years, and God forbid you strike your opponent because you'll be waiting a long while for the punch to even connect. The slowness even affects incredibly simple things like moving around the ring, which is a huge pain in the ass. It makes the gameplay feel incredibly tedious and clunky more than anything. The only good thing this game's gameplay has going for it is the fact that you can place weapons wherever you want, but other than that, the gameplay really has nothing else going for it. 2K15's biggest problem is that it focuses a little too much on realism and simulation, which is a pretty drastic change from the arcade style gameplay that we had in 2K14. This game also introduced chain wrestling, which I will admit was a pretty cool feature, but the issue is that the rest of the gameplay just wasn't very good. The gameplay is probably what I would consider to be 2K15's biggest weakness, but considering this game has hardly anything else to even call a strength, it's not saying much. Well, since I'm being so negative, I might as well talk about a positive aspect of this game, like the roster, for example. The roster in this game is actually pretty decent, since we got Goldust, 2002 Kane, Ultimate Warrior, and even 2004 Randy Orton, which 2K just refuses to give us nowadays for some reason. Sure, at the end of the day, it's not the greatest roster of all time, but it gets the job done. Another thing this game does pretty well is the arena selection, since there's a ton of arenas to choose from, all of which are pretty solid in my opinion. There's a lot of ruthless aggression arenas in the game, like the 2004 Royal Rumble, 2002 SummerSlam, and even the 2002 Raw Arena, which is just awesome, and it gets even better with the amount of early 2010 arenas we got as well. There's just so much variety in this game's arena selection, and that plays a big part in why it's as solid as it is. You know what doesn't have a lot of variety though? The match types. Oh my God, this game has no match types at all. 2K14 had special guest referees, slobber knocker, I quit, and all these different unique match types that were incredibly fun to play. Then with 2K15, they just decided to get rid of all those, which left us with hardly any match types to play as a result. Seriously, these are the only options for 4-man match types in the game. I think what makes it worse is that matches like Casket and special guest referee are literally featured and showcased, but aren't in the actual game as exhibition matches. match types. How they managed to make a wrestling game with no match types is beyond me. All in all, when it comes down to it, 2K15's biggest problems are its gameplay and severe lack of match types. As I said, the roster and arena selection aren't the worst, but everything else is just horrible and not fun. Playing this game in this video actually gave me a headache because the gameplay was so infuriating to deal with. It constantly felt like the game was fighting against me half the time, with how often the slowness would cause my inputs to not match up with what I was doing on screen. Not to mention, there just wasn't a whole lot for me to play since, again, there's no match types in this entire game. Now that I've talked about all that, I think it's time we get into all the other modes this game has to offer. Well, if I'm gonna talk about the modes, I might as well talk about the big mode that this game introduced, which is of course the 2K Showcase. Honestly, the 2K Showcase in this game was actually pretty interesting since there was a total of 2 different showcases you could play through, which added a lot of variety to the mode. And the 2 showcases that were featured were actually pretty good. The first showcase takes you through John Cena's and CM Punk's rivalry from 2011 to 2013, while the second one takes you through the bitter rivalry between Shawn Michaels and Triple H from 2002 to 2004. While the showcase is good at its core, it ends up just suffering from the awful gameplay that I talked about earlier. Doing the objectives in the showcase is a tedious, frustrating mess, and I genuinely got a headache playing through the mode. Outside of that fact though, the showcase is still pretty good, all things considered. As usual, it's cool seeing all these iconic moments from these matches recreated with in-game cutscenes, and being able to play through both of these rivalries is cool as hell. Moving on to the My Career, yeah, it's not very good. Now, I like that there isn't really a linear story, but at the end of the day, it's just so boring and uninteresting. You start off in the Performance Center and then gradually work your way up through the company, but the problem is that the mode just isn't interesting enough to keep me engaged. And speaking of which, Universe Mode isn't all that interesting either. Universe Mode in this game is the definition of lifeless. There's really not much for me to say about it because at the end of the day, it's the same old Universe Mode we're used to, but worse since they cut down on the amount of cutscenes in the mode. And it lacks a lot of features that even WWE12 had in its Universe Mode in 2011. Overall, WWE2K15's modes for the most part are pretty bad. Yeah, Showcase is good, but as I said, it's bogged down by the terrible gameplay, while Universe Mode and My Career are just straight up not good to begin with. With that though, we might as well wrap things up. Well, after replaying the next-gen version of WWE 2K15, I gotta say, I don't think I want to ever do that again. I think I can say without a shadow of a doubt that WWE 2K15 on Xbox One is one of the worst wrestling games I have ever played. With how piss poor the gameplay is, how lackluster the actual content is, and just how boring a lot of the modes are, it's safe to say that if you missed out on playing this specific version of 2K15 back in the day, you really didn't miss out on much. Now do yourself a favor and go play the 360 version of 2K15 because it's so much better.